we're inhaling so much of these nanoparticles that every brain they've tested has about a, a tablespoonful of nanoplastics in our brains.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of material. It appears they're dumping 40 to 60 million tons of toxic nanoparticles into our skies annually. 40 to 60 million tons. And we get to breathe, inhale, eat, drink, all of that. It's contaminating soils, it's killing soil microbiome. Crops are collapsing. You can't grow anything here in Northern California. The forest is dying by the day. How is that not a
Yeah.
real-time, immediate fight for life? Climate engineering is a lethal straitjacket on the planet's life support systems. If it's allowed to continue mathematically, statistically, we have no chance, not even for near-term survival. If your head's on fire, you need to ignore your skin knee and your stub toe. You need to put your head out. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here.
So many people still believe that the weather's natural. But what if I told you that much of what we see in the sky, those streaks, those weather abnormalities, those patterns, they really are not normal and they're not just climate change. They're something far more sinister. So geoengineering, intentional weather modification, is not a conspiracy theory. It's a global reality with devastating consequences for our planet, our health, and our future. And today, I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back a returning guest who has spent years uncovering the truth. Dane Wigington is one of the world's foremost voices on geoengineering. Through his platform, geoengineeringwatch.org, he's been exposing how governments and private interests are manipulating our climate, poisoning our atmosphere, and deceiving the public. So this is one video that I'm really going to ask everyone to share and comment on. This information is not getting out fast enough to many people. It's being hidden, and as a community, we can really help change that. So Dane, thank you so much for joining me today. How are you doing?
Doing my best, Catherine. Thank you for your voice on this most dire issue that far too few, even now, understand the gravity and immediacy of this threat. It's not just devastating what's left of our planet's remaining life support systems. And for those that still doubt that, the planet, the climate, the environment, ecosystems aren't just damaged, they're devastated. It's not just from climate engineering. We've never said that at geoengineeringwatch.org. We've been very horrible stewards of the planet. But when you do this on top of the rest, that is a recipe for near-term planetary omnicide. So this one issue is not only completely destroying what's left of the planet's life support systems, it's contaminating virtually everything, ubiquitously. Every breath we take, every drop of water, every bit of food. And again, we're not denying other sources of contamination, but we're saying this intentional dispersion of nanoparticles, toxic elements into our atmosphere, destroying the ozone layer. The list is long, but this is a definite death sentence, near-term planetary omnicide if these programs are allowed to continue. We're simply trying to prioritize. If we have this biggest hole in the bottom of the boat, nothing else matters if the whole boat goes down, does it?
I couldn't agree with you more. And I think there's still so much misunderstanding with the general public, Jane, but also in the scientific communities, in the political spheres, about what geoengineering actually is. And so many people still think it's a conspiracy theory. So can you just give us a little overview of what do we mean when we're talking about geoengineering? Because it's so broad and so complex, and why you think it's still so mocked, really, in so many spheres.
Which is very perplexing. If
Mm.
people don't believe what they can see with their own eyes, obviously this is going on. You don't have grid patterns in the sky one day and nothing the next with similar atmospheric conditions and jets flying over regions where there's no commercial air routes flying in different directions that aren't flight paths. You see one aircraft leaving a trail from horizon to horizon next to another one leaving nothing. This is just simple deductive reasoning. And we have film footage at geoengineeringwatch.org of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible, turning dispersions on or off. There's nothing to theorize about. It's happening. We've taken the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration lab to altitude, top scientists in it, all on film, all on the record, all exposed in our film, The Dimming, which is 25 million views now and counting. Tested that material that we sampled from a NOAA flying lab at Rensselaer Polytechnic in New York, proved climate engineering elements starting with aluminum nanoparticles were in this dispersion from heavy aircraft in our skies. Aluminum toxic to all life, period. And the so-called science community, Catherine, at this point is simply being used as a tool of deception for the powers that be. And far too many have seemed to abandon all their honor, their morality, their virtue, and will say anything they're paid to say and deny the ramifications of these operations, pretending they're just a proposal that might be deployed someday. I mean, we're living truly in an asylum at this point, but I want to stress this. When people think of near-term threats, they're trained to think that, well, that might be something centuries out or decades out. It's kicking in the front door now, based on the damage we see to the planet's remaining life support systems and human health as well. But I will be surprised personally if we reach the end of this year without very big links in the chain falling out. And that means when there's not enough food to put on the shelves, crops are collapsing everywhere, and when people start to wake up to what their governments have done to them without their knowledge or consent, this is a global issue, and they're about to take to the streets with the proverbial pitchforks and torches, you can bet the power structure will play much bigger cards, whether that's pathogen release, ramping up global conflict, martial law, false flag events. They're not going to let the public wake up and come looking for them.
It's so true. And one of the things when we spoke before, and I will link our previous interviews below, but I think you said was so pertinent, was that so often people don't really take these things seriously and think that it's got to move right up to the top of their priority list until it literally starts affecting them personally. And so many people are so far removed from nature now and so far removed from their food chains. But also, unless you're actually out there in nature, trying to grow your own food, seeing what's happening to the wildlife and the forest where you are, to the fish populations, the planktons, it's very easy for people to be fed the propaganda and to sort of almost want to believe it. So making it really personal for people that are watching us, what are some of the human health ramifications of what they're spraying on us?
We are inhaling a plethora of toxic nanoparticles with every breath we take. That's not my opinion. I encourage people to search, for example, the polymer or microplastic particles that now the science community is acknowledging, and that's an element in climate engineering operations as well. We're inhaling so much of these nanoparticles that every brain they've tested has about a tablespoonful of nanoplastics in our brains.
Yeah.
That's a tremendous amount of material. And recent science study has stated, depending on the location and conditions, we may be inhaling as much as 20 million nanoparticles in a single breath. And people need to know how small nanoparticles are to try to conceptualize that. You can fit 100,000 across the width of a single human hair. Wow. But the smaller the particle, the more devastating it is. Doesn't matter what the element is, any element. But when you're talking about toxic elements on top of that have a factor called synergistic toxicity, when you combine these already toxic elements, they become exponentially more toxic. And we're inhaling all this is showing up in human organs, every single organ, including the brain, peer-reviewed study to prove it. And yes, we have decomposing plastics in the environment. We know that, obviously. But when you have polymer nanoparticles that appear to be of a uniform manufactured size and form, then we have to look toward climate engineering operations. And these particles showing up everywhere. And to give you an idea of how toxic things are, recent peer-reviewed study of wild-caught fish in the continental US, 500 locations, all of them toxic. And the conclusion of this science study was eating one of these fish would be equivalent to drinking a month's worth of tainted water, quote unquote. How long can we live in a completely toxic fishbowl?
Yeah, it's affecting absolutely every stage of the food chain. It's absolutely horrendous. Now, before we move on to some of the more details, obviously the change of administration in the United States where you are We've got a global audience, but that's pretty key. Are you seeing any prominent people speaking out about this and raising it to the top of the agenda? Because I think most of my audience are very well aware of the Make America Healthy Again campaign. But as you so rightly opened with, Dane, you know, when we're being sprayed from above, every single bit of food that's grown, every bit of water, every air we breathe, everything is being poisoned. So it seems a little bit ridiculous to be concentrate on removing red dye from certain foods when this is still going on. Is there anything that's given you hope from what you've seen in the current administration?
No. And
Mm.
you're completely correct about what you just stated. It is virtually pointless to focus on any other issue without addressing this issue first and foremost, which is toxifying, contaminating every breath we take, every drop of water. Literally every drop of rain on planet Earth is contaminated right now. We know that. We have peer-reviewed study to prove that. And again, we're not just blaming climate engineering. We're spewing out toxic chemicals from every conceivable direction. But when you have aircraft in our skies dumping as much as 100 tons of toxic elements in a single payload. In fact, we extrapolated from rain tests over Minnesota, working with the University of Minnesota. They're an internationally recognized ag institution. Based on the amount of material in the rain there and extrapolating that, projecting it globally, it appears they're dumping 40 to 60 million tons of toxic nanoparticles into our skies annually. 40 to 60 million tons. And we get to breathe, inhale, eat, drink, all of that. It's contaminating soils. It's killing soil microbiome. Crops are collapsing. You can't grow anything here in Northern California. The forest is dying by the day, literally, not just from the top down, but from the roots up. So when it does rain here, the rain is toxic, literally. We know what's in the rain because we test it. And we know aluminum is toxic, again, to all life forms. It's killing root systems. I mean, what does it take for people to realize we're fighting for our lives right now? So as far as this administration, what we've seen in the US is not a curtailing of these operations, but a ramping up.
Yeah.
Catherine, did you see the blizzard first time in recorded history in New Orleans? Did you see that?
Yeah, I did. But only I would say, Dane, through the alternative media, not a mention on mainstream media, obviously where I am in the UK, or looking at the global news.
Well, let's look at the date of that. That was January 21st, the day after this administration took office. We saw a radical ramping up of chemical ice nucleation cloud seeding operations. These are patented processes. It means they can, with chemical elements, turn what should have been a liquid precipitation event into a frozen precipitation event, chemically induced. It's an endothermic reacting element. These are, again, patented processes. It creates a cold, dense layer of air in the ground, lots of sensationalized headlines. So people forget about the summers from hell that we're having, where we had Phoenix was 100 and something days above 110 degrees. How long does anyone think they can survive in those kind of temperatures?
Yeah.
The water is drying up everywhere. They're building like there's no tomorrow, and there won't be on the current course. But if you generate a snowstorm, a chemically induced snowstorm in New Orleans, everybody thinks, oh, it must be fine. Look, it snowed here. How could there be any damage to the planet? And that's part of the point of climate engineering. Create the illusion of somehow normalcy, or at least diverting attention from the incineration that's happening around the globe. And so what was happening while we had a snowstorm in New Orleans and Florida?
Yeah.
Blizzard in Florida on the beaches, and they sensationalized the hell out of those headlines. What was happening at that exact same window of time? And media didn't mention this. So while there was a blizzard on the Gulf Coast, Florida, and New Orleans, it was above freezing and raining in Alaska, in Greenland, in Iceland, in Siberia, and Moscow, while there was a blizzard in New Orleans, above freezing and raining in all those other places. No one talks about that.
I mean, it is literally enough to make you speechless. But I hate to say this, but when I mentioned about some of these things, and this was to the scientific community, actually, Dane, that I raised it to, people just came back and said, yeah, that's the problem with global warming. and they're not addressing the climate engineering. And I think what's so frustrating is the fact that so few people in positions of authority, whether it's in the scientific or political sphere, are talking out about this. And what they're doing is they're getting people to look in the wrong direction when it's too late. So what else, what other evidence in terms of patents, actual sort of evidence and documentation can people look at to make them realize, look, this really is happening and you're being fed some very false narratives about what the most important area to address now. I completely agree with you, Dane. We're absolutely not saying that there's other problems that need addressing at all, but this is the absolute number one priority to buy some time for the planet.
Yes. On your frustration with academia, I so share that. I deal with them in so many arenas, and the programming is mind-numbing. I would put their denial of this issue in the same category of the safe and effective mantra
Yeah.
in the medical industry, which, how simple is that equation? You can't put the kinds of materials the medical industry is putting inside human bodies and not have a problem. And with this scenario, when they blame a blizzard in New Orleans on global warming, that is mind-numbingly moronic. It has nothing to do with global warming. The flash cooldowns are chemically induced, period. We have the Chinese government stating on the record that by 2025, they would be able to cover half their country with engineered rain and snow. They specifically state snow. How do you create snow? You seed the clouds with endothermic reacting chemicals, and that's exactly what they're doing. And everybody covered it: Popular Science, ABC News, MSNBC, CNN. But if you bring it up in the US and the UK, suddenly you're wearing a tinfoil hat.
Yeah.
Because people are so effectively programmed, they would much rather gulp down the pacifying lies than the bitter truth. And that's exactly where so many in first world nations are. They do not want the truth. They want to be lied to. They want to believe that there's nothing wrong with the planet. The party's going to continue forever. And it's mind-numbing. We live virtually in an asylum. And I don't care at this point who rolls their eyes and walks away and tells himself it isn't so. Denial won't save you, and it won't hold up much longer. We are about to hit the wall at full velocity. Climate engineering making it far worse, not better. And here's really an underlying caveat that should be considered and remembered. With these sprayed operations that they have right now in place, elements that are in these operations, we have aluminum, barium, manganese, surfactants, polymer fibers, graphene. The last two, polymer fibers and graphene, are used, and we've discussed this before, I believe, but militarily they're used for biological carrier platforms to carry a pathogen from the clouds to the ground. Now we see these outbreaks everywhere. We know they're hammering food supplies. We can see on satellite imagery that they are conducting climate engineering operations over agricultural regions that are flash freeze, flash flood, flash drought. It's devastating agricultural production. Why would we think they're not going to do something similar to populations in a much more direct fashion by using these elements that are already in the rain, polymer fibers and graphene, to distribute pathogens? We have the bird flu now devastating food supplies in the US, so much so that we're importing something like 500 million eggs from the country of Turkey to feed US civilians. How long does anyone think that can continue? Because the bird populations are being wiped out. And again, they can spread these pathogens in any manner they want. Anybody who thinks that those in power are here to protect them and their posterity needs to wake up.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, a lot of people have heard about the weather manipulation that was done in the Vietnam War. How does that compare with what we're seeing? Because there's so many different things. You know, people hear about HAARP, they hear about cloud seeding, they hear about blocking out the sun to slow down global warming, which is quite the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard if anyone's got any basic understanding of biology. So have you got any other examples where you're pretty certain there's some evidence that these weather manipulation activities are going on that might make people sit back and listen and think, hang on a minute, yes, even though I've heard about that?
Well, again, I would encourage them to look at the film footage we have at geoengineeringwatch.org. And if people don't believe what they see with their own eyes, up close film footage of these aircraft at altitude, nozzles visible turning on and off. If they don't believe that, there is nothing I can say to them. If they don't believe their lying eyes, there's nothing I can say to them. So if we back into this on one, as you stated, solar radiation management, and people should use the science terms when they're introducing this issue to others. That's very important. Avoid the chemtrails term like the plague. It's okay with personal conversations, but it leads straight to conspiracy theory and hoax because it's not a science term. That's the buzzword marginalization term. Use the science terms. And yes, I mean, think how absolutely insane the very notion that you can fill the sky with toxic light scattering particles to block some of the sun's incoming thermal energy as a way to cool the planet. It's absurd. You're destroying the planet's natural protective layer, starting with the ozone layer, which is on the cusp of functional collapse right now. We're getting UVC in the surface. That's a DNA damaging spectrum of UV radiation. Climate engineering is the single greatest factor destroying the ozone layer, which is by itself an extremely near-term existential threat. So this so-called proposal by the so-called climate science community put light scattering particles. This destroys the ozone layer, contaminates virtually everything, completely disrupts the hydrological cycle, and traps more heat than it reflects. What a great idea, right? I mean, it's so insane. You can hardly imagine that this is even being entertained as from the science community as something that has any legitimacy other than omnicide. And as far as backing into Vietnam, Project Popeye is what you're referring to. They were so successful at controlling precipitation in the 60s that they passed environmental modification treaties in the 70s forbidding weather modification in wartime. Not that anybody cares about those treaties. So let's consider that. If they were that successful 60 years ago at controlling precipitation, you don't think they could make it rain over Southern California where whole regions were just incinerated because there was no rain, zero, for almost a year in the Palisades and other areas where these incinerations took place? No rain for almost a year. And when you add that to documents we found at geoengineeringwatch.org, one U.S. military document, 140 pages long, titled Forest Fires as a Military Weapon. This posted at geoengineeringwatch.org. It describes exactly the kind of preparation to incinerate an area that we saw in Southern California, cutting off of precipitation, coating that area with incendiary particles, which these particles are. There's no dispute about that. Aluminum is such an effective incendiary that it's used in military demolitions. So we saw the exact kind of preparation described in this U.S. military document in LA and other parts of Southern California. And then the source of ignition is a separate subject. Although even then, we have photographs in LA of houses fully engulfed on the inside, flames coming out the windows, and the fire hadn't even reached that structure yet.
Wow.
How does that happen? We know smart meters can do that because there's legal action for smart meters starting fires. Is that why they push smart meters so desperately on populations? And I've fought wildfires on the front lines for many years. I know a lot about that subject. And to have a uniform burn, as we've seen whole neighborhoods completely incinerated, you would need multiple ignition sources. Even with an 80-mile-an-hour wind pushing that fire, you would still need multiple ignition sources, which the smart meters would provide them. But the bottom line is this: what is setting the template for those fires to burn with such ferocity? And that is absolutely climate engineering, period. We can see it on satellite imagery. So we remember the forest fires in Canada a couple of years ago, and we had multiple ignition sources at the same time period then. But what set the template for those fires to burn with such unstoppable ferocity? And that's climate engineering, period. And we have peer-reviewed study. I'll leave it at this, Catherine. We have peer-reviewed study from the science community, and your listeners can find this in the engineering wildfire section at geoengineeringwatch.org, that actually advocate for the intentional burning of northern latitude forests to put enough smoke particles into the air to provide temporary cooling for the planet. They're mimicking a volcano. Can you imagine the insanity of that? Destroying what's left of the planet's life support systems to temporarily cool certain regions, and that's what it did. The fires that started in Canada, the smoke bank was manipulated over the Northeast, U.S. Northeast, and temperatures drop 30 degrees. At what cost?
Yeah, the doubling down and
Yes.
complete recklessness is disgusting. Now, we always get asked the question, who is doing this? Is it the military? Why do the pilots not know that they're involved in this? What's your understanding of that, Dane, in terms of who are the main people that are actually undertaking it? So I suppose you've got two parts to that question. There's people that are physically flying the planes and loading up the planes, and there's also who's giving the instructions for what's done where.
Everyone's compartmentalized. And one, as far as the top of this pyramid of insanity, that's those who print the money.
Yeah.
Those who control the central banks, control militaries, thus they control governments and countries. That's the top of this pyramid. As far as those conducting these operations, they're all compartmentalized. They're being told they're doing something good, something benevolent, something to help save the planet, the country. The same as the pilots in Vietnam were told when they were spraying Agent Orange on their own comrades on the ground, not only killing civilians, but eventually killing their own comrades as well. And nobody's told the truth on any of this, and people choose to keep their head in the sand. And that needs to change. That absolutely needs to change. We have U.S. military oath that says they're obligated to protect their citizens from all threats, foreign and domestic. Mm. The greatest threat we face right now appears to be from our own governmental apparatus, if you will. So bottom line is on carrying out these operations, military, yes, commercial carrier aircraft are being used. I say that absolutely without any speculation because we have film footage of them dispersing these aerosols into the sky. Now, the pilots are not directly involved. We've never implicated personal or personnel from commercial carriers, but their aircraft are definitely being used. And we see when there was a massive uproar over how much weight you carried on the plane. It started just after the year 2000. That appears to be when they started to utilize commercial aircraft with automated systems, much smaller payload than a military tanker, but they're definitely being used. We're communicating with commercial pilots that know this is going on. They're not a part of it. They're not flicking a switch in the cockpit, but their aircraft are being used and they know it. And they're distributing Geoengineering Watch printed materials in pilot lunchrooms and other places covertly to try to wake their colleagues up. But we have whole industries that will do whatever they're told, the people within those industries, because it provides a paycheck and a pension. And Catherine, it's no different than the medical industrial complex. Again, safe and effective with elements that are neurotoxins. I mean, you can't inject neurotoxins like aluminum and mercury without causing damage. And yet the whole industry pretends that that's okay. This is in that category.
It absolutely is. And we touched on it last time, and it's something that I've been working on for years. Is, as you said, the cumulative effects of this. So everyone's concerned about fluoride in water, and they should be, but the combination of the aluminum and the fluoride, and then you have glyphosate into the mix, gets straight through the blood-brain barrier, let alone the gut lining and the gut barrier. And with, you know, everyone, I don't think there's anyone watching this that hasn't seen the explosion in dementia, Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, autoimmune conditions, neuro issues. It's just every possible cancers, medical disease you can think of. And again, absolutely, we're not saying it's the only cause, but it's definitely igniting the fire from everything else.
It's the biggest. It is mathematically by far the biggest. If you can't go anywhere on planet Earth and breathe without inhaling what they're dispersing in our skies, how is that not a real-time, immediate fight for life? And it's not just the toxic metals causing those neurodegenerative diseases you mentioned. The polymer nanoparticles are as well. All of this combined, and that's documented in science study right now. These are recent studies. So again, if we can't function, if we can't think clearly, how long are we going to be fighting for anything? And that certainly serves those in power as well. That's a side benefit for them because they understand, and this is what no one wants to hear. The current paradigm will not continue much longer. It cannot. The planet's failing life support systems cannot support this paradigm any longer. Those in power know it. They are definitely trying to thin the herd. And those who want to pretend otherwise are simply keeping their head in the sand.
Absolutely. I mean, it just beggars belief that we're being distracted in so many different ways of look over here whilst this is still going on. Now, I think we always get asked a question, but I'm going to repeat it again for people. One of the first things that everyone will say is, why would they do this? Because they're breathing in the air themselves, they're drinking the water, they're eating the food supplies. We do know certain members want to get off to Mars, so off you go. But in all seriousness, it's a question that people just don't understand the mentality of people that would allow this to go on. What would you say to people that have got that question?
I'm glad you brought it up because it is a very, very key core question that, in fact, stops many people from investigating further because they can't comprehend, quote, why would they do this to themselves? And I would again point out, how much have they already done to themselves? Again, the detonation of 2,400 nuclear bombs contaminated everything. They did it anyway. Project Starfish Prime and Project Fishbowl, the names of the U.S. nuclear projects that detonated hydrogen bombs in the magnetosphere, they thought it could collapse the entire atmosphere. Did that stop them? No, because their quest for power is all encompassing for them. They cannot stop. They can't let go. We're talking about power addicts, people that will do anything to retain that power or increase that power. And this is in that category. And you have a population that has been so far hopelessly asleep at the wheel, by and large. And those in power know that they don't want the population to wake up. They can't afford the population to wake up and go looking for them again with their proverbial pitchforks and torches. So they're going to continue to do anything to retain this power until the last possible moment, regardless of the cost. So when we see what they've already done, again, not just the nuclear weapon detonations, but even Fukushima, triple nuclear meltdown, no technology to fix it, no end in sight. That's a global extinction level event eventually, if other factors don't do the job first, which is definitely the track we're on. But we have 442 more Fukushimas that are going to happen as society collapses. Does that stop those in power from building more nuke plants? No, they're building 60 more right now. They're recommissioning formerly decommissioned, dilapidated, and outdated nuclear power plants right now, just to provide power for AI and the data centers. Is that not the epitome of total insanity? And everybody pretending that, especially here in the US, the MAGA and MAHA mantras are so incredibly moronic at this point. How are you going to make America great again on a dead planet? How are you going to make Americans healthy again with this toxic filth spewing down from our atmosphere? And they know about it, Catherine.
Yeah.
I mean, Robert Kennedy interviewed me for an hour. I spoke to him last week. They know. They absolutely know. But do we see anything forthcoming? I don't. And it's up to us. Again, we're the ones we've been waiting for. Every single person listening to this broadcast is not helpless, and those in power are not gods. It's up to us to make every day count, share credible data. I can't stress that enough. Too many people, if anybody says anything about what's happening in our skies, no matter how baseless it might be or off track, they start to propagate and share that. And that's a mistake.
Yeah.
We have to stand on solid grounds, share credible data, verifiable data. And that's what we provide at geoengineeringwatch.org. We are non-political. And again, so people think if you don't have any faith in this administration, you must have loved the last one. That couldn't be further from the truth. You don't get into that club unless you're beholden to those who print the money, period. Yeah. And that's how the game works. So it's, again, we are non-political at geoengineeringwatch.org. We're simply saying if we stay on this current trajectory, none of us are going to be around much longer, period.
Couldn't agree more. Now, I know this is it's a heavy subject for everyone listening, but it's not. There is hope. There is definitely so much we can do, and this is why we're having these conversations. Dane is incredibly busy working, as he's already mentioned, with some incredible people all over the world. But we need every single person watching this just to open their minds. All of Dane's links to geoengineeringwatch.org are going to be below. It will be pinned in the top comment as well. The resources are there. You don't need to understand everything about this issue with Dane's incredible knowledge to start speaking and directing people to that website. The Dimming is a film that everyone should see, absolutely everyone, and share widely. So what else can people do, Dane? Because it can be very overwhelming for people. People think there's nothing that they can do, but they can.
I think it starts, and you're right, and I agree with you. It starts with a change of perspective and philosophy. Why are we here? Are we here to pursue personal pleasures at the expense of our posterity that will never exist on the current course? Or are we here to make a difference? And when you adopt that philosophy and realize that every single one of us can start a spot fire of awareness with credible data, you share that awareness. And even if a person rejects it initially, you have planted a seed that they will be forced to face very, very soon. And that matters in and of itself, I would argue. If any of us has any part in waking up another person to clearly see the wider horizon, that matters by itself. But if we start enough of those spot fires of awareness and ask others to do the same so that it merges into a blaze that the power structure can't put out, and we're able to expose this issue and stop this particular level of insanity from the human race and allow the planet to respond on its own to the damage already done, that would at least buy time. And I know you're connected with nature, Catherine, and as am I. I mean, I'm in awe always of the miraculousness of the web of life. Given a chance, it always seems to find a way, but we have to give it that chance. Climate engineering is a lethal straitjacket on the planet's life support systems. If it's allowed to continue mathematically, statistically, we have no chance, not even for near-term survival. We have to plug this hole in the bottom of the boat. If we can do that, we can buy time, and everyone is capable for free from their own home computer, share credible data, find links or email contacts for elected officials, agency representatives, media people, send them a link and ask them to address this issue. And also it's productive to CC as many other aware and awake activists as you can, make the message peaceful and professional, but openly CC others so that that person you're mailing the information to knows a lot of other individuals are listening to that conversation. And that makes them accountable. And in starting that kind of spot fire of awareness, we can force this issue into the full light of day. And if we can do that, we have a chance of stopping it from the inside out by waking those up that are participating to the fact that they're participating in their own demise and the demise of their posterity.
Absolutely brilliant. I absolutely love that idea of copying openly other people in, because once people know that other people know you've received the information, it's far harder to keep ignoring it. And my plea to everyone watching today is, if you have got this far, thank you so much. You should be very proud of yourself for keeping an open mind and for wanting to make change, because it can seem overwhelming to people. It can seem that there's too much horror going on in the world to deal with. But this, to me, is something about the hope of the fact that by spreading awareness, if we stopped the geoengineering, the impact on every single species on Earth, the impact on the planet, it would buy us time to then make the real other changes that are needed. And sometimes these little things, you can think it's not going to make enough difference. This is one thing that is going to affect every single aspect of every single person's life. And look around. How is your health? How is the health of your loved ones, your animals? For those people that are growing their own food, what changes have you noticed? You can't deny it. If think back to when you were at school and what the sky used to look like. Just be open enough to just think rationally about this and think, actually, if I'm going to pick one thing to put my effort on, this is probably the thing that's going to change the world for the better more than anything else I can think of.
Without question. And that's why I've dedicated over 20 years of my life to this cause. Because again, if your head's on fire, you need to ignore your skinned knee and your stubbed toe. You need to put your head out. And that's exactly what we're dealing with here. And these flash cool down events, again, I want to stress that is climate engineering, period. Yeah. And the radical heat we see too, because this is another factor. The frequency transmission manipulations of these particles is yet another layer of threat. The frequency transmissions are 10 times more powerful than communications transmissions. So all the people focusing on the dangers of communications transmissions, which is a just cause. But if we have another source that is transmitting frequencies at 10 times the strength, shouldn't we focus on that as well? And that's what's used in climate engineering to steer cyclonic rotations, to create high pressure heat domes, a term I'm sure you've heard now because they use it all the time. And so when they create an ionosphere heater induced heat dome, and again, people that don't think they have this technology, please just do some research. This is not scientifically disputed. They, with these facilities, can cause an electrical chain reaction in the ionosphere that superheats that layer of the atmosphere. That causes the atmosphere to expand up and down. The downward push is a high pressure heat dome. So everything under that dome roasts. In fact, roasts so much. One example we have from Canadian British Columbia. This is a very cold, damp region right on the coast. They had temperatures several years ago, 121 degrees on the coast of British Columbia. It's inconceivable. It killed everything. It killed everything from the mussels, the shorebirds, everything died there. Florida had ocean temperatures a little over a year ago of 102 degrees. The ocean was 102 degrees. It killed everything. That's the same temperature that hot tub manufacturers recommend for their jacuzzi tubs. I mean, people have no idea how bad it is right now. But again, it gives a sense of personal power when you start to share credible data from a credible source, and you start to see people around you waking up, and you know you're making a difference. Whatever happens, whatever comes, you know that you made a difference. That matters. And if enough of us are willing to rise to the occasion, Catherine, we can yet make an overall difference, even at this late hour.
We absolutely can. Thank you so much, Dane. Your work is absolutely appreciated by each and every one of us. All the links are below. You don't need to do this on your own. Dane and his organisation have provided so many resources for every type of person. So please, please, please click on the link below and start today, because we've got to talk up about this and we have to stop it. And the great thing is that we can. Dane, thank you so much for not just for today, but for everything you're continuing to do. It takes an extraordinary degree of resilience, knowledge, intelligence, perseverance, and I really admire you for that, because we were just talking off camera. It can be overwhelming, and you keep going and you keep providing us with the best credible resources. So thank you so much.
Team effort, Catherine. Thank you so much for your voice. Thank you to your followers. It's our collective efforts that can yet make a difference. Thank you all.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you so much for taking the time to listen. And if you feel inspired, please do share with your friends and family. This helps us spread the word and also helps me encourage some exciting new guests to take part in this podcast. And above all, stay curious and stay free.